Well, what's really interesting actually for a smaller retailer, so when I speak to the bigger retailers and we talk about doing authenticity testing, they're always talking about, making the manufacturer pay for the testing. So they pass that cost on to the supplier. The small retailer, again, lack of leverage, probably wouldn't be able to do that. But that's actually not a bad thing.
Welcome to the Natural Products Marketer podcast. I'm your host, Tina Maddock. On this podcast, you'll hear from manufacturers, retail owners and operators, and other business experts that will help you grow your business so you can serve more people and change more lives. I'm so excited to chat with you today, Deleo. And we just recorded a podcast with Brian Hall from True Grace. And he mentioned you on the podcast. And so for the listeners, they will have already heard his. It's going to be released next week for you. But for the listeners, that will already have happened. And so they're probably wondering, who is this lady that we need to meet?
Oh, he talked about me, not Purity IQ specifically?
Both.
Wow.
He talked about both. So I'm sure they're interested in hearing our conversation today because he had such lovely things to say about you. So I'm excited to get started chatting.
Great.
But first, okay, so you spoke at Soho, which if listeners aren't familiar with that, it is a trade show that is put on by Senpa. And they bring in different relevant speakers based on your feedback, listeners, anyone who's an independent retailer in this space. They're looking for your voice to help you solve challenges, problems, or to help you realize some blind spots that you might not be paying attention to. And I do think that you kind of fall into some blind spots that might be happening. So we're going to talk about some of those today for sure. But tell us a little bit about what you were hearing and feeling at Soho. You got to speak to retailers. What's the feedback? What was the vibe? How did it go?
So this was my first time attending this conference. I met the executive director at another event that I was at and that I was speaking at, and she thought it would be really great, relevant topic for her audience. And just interestingly for your listeners, just a little bit of background for me. My background, although I am the CEO and a co-founder of this company, Purity IQ, that we'll be talking about in a second, my background is all in retail. So I was a both food and drug retailer for over 30 years. So I'm aging and dating myself, but all of it in Canada. So about 15 years in pharmacy retail, and then 20 years in grocery retail.
Wow!
And so I have an affinity. Of course, I'm a retailer, true and true, in and out. You can't take it out of my blood. So it was an interesting conference to attend and to be able to speak with retailers. And again, my background in retail was all with very large chains. So in the pharmacy world, I was with, at one point, the largest grocery chain, pharmacy chain in Canada. And then the supermarket, 20 years, was with Sobeys, the second largest chain in Canada. So I came from a world where we have a lot of leverage. Conversations, you held, the big end of the stick when you were talking to suppliers and manufacturers. And, what I heard, and it wasn't surprising, of course, really is the ability for the smaller guys to be able to compete effectively against the bigger chains, and that's what I heard pretty regularly. And they saw private label as an opportunity for them to be able to, first of all, compete on price. So typically private label is a cheaper retail than the brand name, and it's a better margin play. So that is also of importance to them. And it's also a loyalty play. If you've got a brand that people can't get anywhere else, and they like it, then they will be shopping exclusively at your store for that brand. But the problem that they had, that they were saying, and again, I know there were some mid-sized chains there with several stores, but I ended up talking only to the small one or two store, maybe three store retailers. And they really are dependent on the supplier to get things right, because once the product carries their private label name, I think they realize any issue becomes their issue. If there's a problem with a brand name and a recall, you're not under the microscope. You're carrying the product. It's the manufacturer's issue, and they have to deal with it. But when it's your brand, all of that changes. And they spoke about the fact that what is tough for them is they're limited in their suppliers that they can talk to. I was talking about leverage. The big brands have, the big retailers have leverage, but the smaller ones really, because of their volume, they're really limited to who they can do business with. And so there's cost pressure. You may not get a great private label, cost and that great retail you're looking for. And there's limited visibility into what's actually in the product that you're buying, right? So I would talk to them about authenticity testing. We'll talk a little bit about, explain what my company does, but to be able to have objective proof that what you're putting on your shelf is genuine and consistently genuine, and not just compliant on paper, and documents can be easily falsified, but to be able to say that, with scientific proof that it is authentic and that it's relatively inexpensive. So the cost of testing is inexpensive, but really importantly, you don't need a massive QA department, to do this. You just need to find a solid private label partner with a proactive mindset. Really, that was kind of where I was talking. So I was talking to them both from a Purity IQ perspective and also as a former retailer. I think they were listening to me a bit more than they might typically think that this is just a sales pitch, from a company who's at the show, right? So that was what I was hearing pretty consistently.
Yeah, and we talk about white label a lot because it is such a great way to maintain some margin, give your customers a different price point, and really make it sticky. All the things that you just said, they can't find this product anywhere else, so you're more competitive than anything else. And they come back to you over and over again for that product because they just can't find it anywhere else. What you need for that is a really good brand already in the store, for people already trusting you that you're the person that knows the best sourcing. You're bringing them purity of product already. So some of that is from a marketing and messaging perspective, getting in there and creating that level of value for your customer means that whenever they see your brand versus someone else, they have high trust in the label, just because it has your name on it. Now, everything you're bringing up is super important because that also means you have liability. Erosion of trust is so fast. Like, you can spend years and years and years and years building it up. But if there's a problem with the product or something comes out about the product, that erosion of trust can happen overnight. And immediately you're going to spend years in repairing that. And so
if you can.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because you might not be able to, especially because most of these stores are community based. And that community turnover doesn't happen very quickly. So you're absolutely right. And I don't know, do you know the book, How Not to Die?
No, I've never heard of that.
Okay, there is a doctor who writes the book, How Not to Die. And more recently, he's come out with How Not to Age. And what's interesting about that is I love reading his books because he has a lot of scientific data to back up all the different claims he's making, or to say, this is why I use turmeric and this is why you pair it with curcumin and capsaicin. So he has a lot of studies, lots of footnotes, very thick books. At the beginning of How Not to Age, he specifically talks about when you go to buy a supplement at a grocery store, he's got a percentage of how many of them actually have what it says on the label that they have. And he also talks about heavy metals and toxins in there. And so I do think, especially there are many people that are coming to your store that are well versed in some of these academic papers or books, or people are making TikToks off of this book. And so talk to us a little bit about what you see about what's on the label versus what's in the jar.
Well, and that's kind of if you go to our website, that's the first thing that comes up on the landing page is we verify that what's on the label is actually in the product. Nothing more, nothing less. So, this is our mantra. And this is really why we created the company. And again, I've mentioned my background is all retail. I'm not a scientist. I don't have a scientific bone in my body. And I didn't mention that so I was in senior positions when I was at the supermarket chain. Amongst them, I was VP of private label for many years. So not only did I, have an opportunity to talk to them as a former retailer, but with knowledge of private label. And so we'll talk about white label in a second. There's pros and cons to white label, but some of the issues are the same, whether it's private label or white label or a brand on the shelf. Forget your own label. A lot of people are misinformed because they think that the regulatory requirement to test products takes care of all of these issues. And there are, minimum tests you have to do to be compliant. Again, to make sure the product's safe for consumption. So, heavy metal, as you mentioned, pesticide, microbial testing, pathogens, etc. And also identity testing. So an identity test, both in the US and Canada and Europe, you have to do an identity test. What a lot of people don't realize is an identity test will just tell you that the product or the ingredient you're expecting to find in the product is there. It won't necessarily tell you if anything else is in there. That's the big, aha moment when we're talking to people, because they assume they're checking off all the boxes. And I'm talking about retailers, the brand owners, and talking about manufacturers. Often they're dependent on others for their input material unless you're vertically integrated. You've got ingredient suppliers you're buying products from. And people are only asking for a certificate of analysis that proves identity. So is there echinacea in this bottle of echinacea? And I said, yep, perfect, done. Is there anything else in there that shouldn't be there? And that's where purity testing comes in. That's why we picked the name Purity IQ, because we wanted to differentiate ourselves and say, it's not just an identity test. And that's all that the regulatory requirements are. So this whole notion of product adulteration, food fraud, and again, in supplements, I know it's not food fraud, but it's fraud. It's all economically motivated. No one's actually trying to kill you. This is not terrorism, but it is trying to make a buck. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people out there trying to make a buck, and it's existed since the dawn of time. I think the first documented cases are ancient Italy or ancient Rome and ancient Greece. So, those are first documented cases. God only knows how far back it really goes. So it's a real concern, and it continues today, and it's not going away anytime soon. So you need to be asking about authenticity testing, not just identity testing. That, I think, is the big issue that people don't really realize. And yeah, go ahead. So I was about to go into white labeling, but go ahead.
Yeah, I want to get there for sure, but I just want to go back because we talked at the beginning of this that there is a much higher margin for the store, and that's part of why they do private label, white label programs. And because there's a higher margin and there are higher stakes involved, I think there's room for people to invest in testing or to require from a manufacturer or supplier that there's testing. I think there's room for that, especially in a private label, white label product.
It's not that there is room, there has to be room.
Yeah.
That's the kicker. Again, people will say, well, I received the documentation. I've got the certificate of analysis. And again, it's only as good as the paper it's written on. These things can be manipulated. They can be forged. And you're saying, that's all I need. Or just verbally, yep, it's passed all the tests. And the smaller retailers, because they don't have leverage, say, we can't, force somebody. We're already limited in the choice of suppliers we can go to for private label. And we'll talk about the white label opportunity in a second. And now I'm going to say you need to show, I'm going to ask you to do an audit. I need to see, this type of testing you're not doing today. They're just going to go hasta la vista, right? They're going to walk away. And and maybe that's a good thing, right? If they walk away. But uh, white labeling is a great opportunity, and it's a great choice, I think, for some retailers to make versus private labeling, because it's kind of an easy and affordable way for the small retailer to offer their own products without having to invest in like product development or anything else. Because the product, as you know, already exists. It's generic, it's pre-made, it's sold to many other retailers potentially under different brand names. Or it could be the same brand name, but it would be, unique to your geography. So they make it so that it is, a private label like product. And then either add your logo or whatever name that you've chosen or they've chosen, and you go to market. And that's,
Yeah.
easy peasy.
Let's talk a little bit about, I know you're identifying some of the differences, but the big difference between private label and white label.
Well, it is the fact that private label is your brand. So you have developed the product, the spec, the standard, your brand standard. You are actually providing like a recipe to the manufacturer, or you work with the manufacturer to develop the recipe, the formulation, whatever it is absolutely yours. And so all of the risk is yours. And the cost is yours, because it's more expensive to do private label than it is to do white label. Mm-hmm. Again, a white label, because it exists already. The manufacturer makes this. They offer it to many different customers under different names. It's one formulation, and it's easier. When you're asking them to start to bring in, new ingredients, different ingredients, maybe a different, lid than they're using for everybody else. Yeah, you want, just something to make it unique. That, costs money. So the advantage to white labeling for a small retailer is speed and cost, right? It's fast, it's simple, it's low risk apparently, but we'll get to that in a second. But the trade-off is control and differentiation, because the same product being on multiple shelves under different brands, you don't always know where it came from or how consistent the quality is, or whether it would have met your brand standards if you had developed brand standards, because no exclusivity equals no control, really, at the end of the day, right? So if the underlying formulation changes at any point or varies between batches, the retailer wouldn't even be aware of it until a problem arises.
Yeah, and I'm going to say that most of the smaller retailers are going white label versus private label.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense, right? It's a big investment to go private label. And like I said at the beginning, your options are really limited, to find. I know it very, very well, a retailer here in Canada with 26 stores, and they have trouble finding private label manufacturers. So imagine, if you've got one or two stores.
Yeah, and I'm going to say that there's reduced risk, like on paper, probably, right, with going white label, but there's still risk of that erosion of trust going white label, that you have to be able to trust the manufacturer there. So talk to us a little bit about how testing, third-party testing products, even in white label, can be such a differentiator.
Well, what's really interesting actually for a smaller retailer, so when I speak to the bigger retailers and we talk about doing authenticity testing, they're always talking about, making the manufacturer pay for the testing. So they pass that cost on to the supplier. The small retailer, again, lack of leverage, probably wouldn't be able to do that. But that's actually not a bad thing, because I was saying at the beginning, the cost is relatively inexpensive to test a product. And if you're doing it before you even launch the product, which was the topic of my talk at the Soho Expo, was doing it at the procurement stage, not necessarily the way everybody does it today. Is when the product's already in the supply chain, it's already on the shelf, and now if you find something, it's a problem, and you're doing recalls and it's crisis management. If you're doing it at the beginning, so if you're interviewing, you're taking some bids maybe from different white label manufacturers to do a product for you, because if it's white label, you can ask several different suppliers, again, because you're not asking for something unique to you. If you're not going to ask them to pay for the testing and you test it yourself, you have an advantage over the retailers who are asking the supplier to do the testing, to send samples to Purity IQ, for example. Because, if they know you're going to be testing the product, chances are they're going to send a pristine sample or they're really, not bright. So, then you've got, okay, well, I've got this sample is good. And maybe, the first few batches that I get or the first few orders that I put in are going to be good. But you start to wonder whether or not that, over time, that quality starts to slip and they start to dilute or whatever to make up, whatever some costs. But if you are testing it yourself without telling them, you can find things out right away and make a decision right away. Again, for a minimal cost, I can trust this supplier. At least today, they're doing all the right things. You would want to do random testing throughout. You never know. People change in companies, pressures change in companies. They decide that they want to, substitute something, dilute something, and this happens very, very frequently. Once they've been able to, not everybody, but once they've secured the business, then it's easy to just say, claw back some of that cost that I gave them to secure the business up front. But that is, one of the things that's a plus for a small retailer. If you pay for your own testing, they have no idea. So you're going to really be able to see what they're sending you right from the beginning. Are these people that I should be putting a big X through because they're cutting corners and lying to me?
Yeah, well, and think about it this way: you don't have to have a white label product to do this. This could be any.
Oh, no, yeah, anything, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we're talking to people about everything all the time, right? It is scary, as I mentioned, because even the big brands out there that aren't retailers, the big brands are dependent on others. And one of the things I spoke about is, this has existed forever and it will continue to exist forever. This, economically motivated food fraud, because the supply chain, there's still supply chain issues. We became very conscious of supply chain issues during COVID, when everything was hard to get, but that's constant. Maybe it exacerbated the situation, but there will always be issues, unfortunately, whether it's geopolitical, like I don't think we're ever going to be in a world without war or without conflict. And it's hard to get ingredients from countries where things like that are happening, or climate change, whether you believe it exists or not. There are droughts, and then there are, flooding and a lot more, effects on crops. People can't get things where they used to get them. So they're being forced to go to new suppliers that they've never gone to before. And you're untested, untried, and you're crossing your fingers and hoping. Well, don't cross your fingers. Get scientific proof, because everything else, audits are audits about the facility. Good manufacturing practices are making sure that the facility is in good shape. It's not testing the product.
Right.
And then you go, well, I'm doing an identity test. Well, yeah, an identity test won't necessarily tell you what else is in the product. It's not a purity test. So these are the things that it's getting people to realize that you need to do more than what you think you need to do, from a regulatory compliance point of view, and even just peace of mind.
Yeah, and this is a great point about people are always asking, how do I evaluate a product or a manufacturer or a brand before I bring them into my store? How do I make sure? What's the checklist that I should be going down? I love for manufacturers or brands to provide, hey, we do third-party testing. Here's what it looks like. Here's our regular routine around it. But if you really want to go that extra mile to ensure that you are giving your customers what they expect that they're getting, this is a perfect opportunity to just test that brand before it comes in your store.
And people are doing it more and more, because as they're starting to realize, and and I think the small companies want to prove it even more. I think that the big retailers talk about trust all the time, but small retailers can actually prove it. It's not just it's not just words. And again, when you verify that what's in your product or what's on the label is actually in your product, you're actually saying to your customers, we know exactly what's in this, we know what we're selling, and we've got the data, the scientific data to back it up. And I think that's, that builds confidence in your clientele. They know that. And if you use certification, so, I know Brian Hall from True Grace was on your podcast recently, and they use our certification, our certified authentic certification mark on their probiotics. And they want to shout it from the rooftops that they go over and above what they need to be doing from a regulatory perspective to make sure that, their probiotics are what they say they are.
Yeah. And so I've seen some really great brands invest up front. And we've even had a conversation on this podcast where it's like, hey, we source ingredients, just like you were talking about. And it comes with a certification, a certificate of authenticity, right, in the door. And their motto is trust but verify. We love that we have this certificate of authenticity, but then we put it through our lab first to make sure that what we're putting in the product ends up being what we want to be in the product. So they have an extra layer of trust but verify. And I think if you find brands who are willing to invest like that, and you also are having a stake in that as well, because you're representing to customers every day. And this is where I think some of the bigger chains sort of get off base, because they are not the people who are making the decisions and have the purse strings, are not the people who are talking to the coach of the Little League team down the street. You guys are the independent retailers, have relationships in that community, and they have to look customers face to face and say, I promise that what we're offering to you passes all of the tests and is actually what's in the bottle, and we're making recommendations to you so you can trust us. It's that old saying around what's in a name, and if you lose your
That's
name, you lose
huge.
everything.
It
So
is reputational risk. You said it. I mean, it's big.
yeah,
The reputational risk is something you cannot afford, to take. You can't. You said it can take years to build up that brand, and then it takes minutes, seconds, for that to just dissolve, and it may not come back. You just never know. And I think that what you're describing can be part of a brand story.
yeah,
It's not just compliance anymore. It becomes a brand story that sets you apart. And exactly what you were saying, you're able to tell your clients, your customers, that you go that extra distance, is that you take quality, seriously, but personally.
right.
That's what I think, differentiates you from, just big conglomerates out there.
Well, also, it's just such a differentiator in the market, because you can go on Amazon and buy just about anything. There's a couple of reasons that people still come to independent retailers. First is because there's a consultation that happens generally where they're like, I've got this and I've heard about this thing, but I don't know. And they're asking you questions around, is this the right choice? Am I looking at everything? And you're helping people through that. They're not getting that on Amazon right now. The other piece is Amazon will let anyone sell anything on their platform. And you can really differentiate yourself by talking about, we only bring trusted people who have the ingredients that are on the label in there. We're not offering you items with heavy metals. Like, saying that out loud is a huge differentiation for whether or not people trust and come to you over and over again versus whatever competitor. It might be down the street, it might be online, but they don't have to wonder, because here you go. Here are all the certifications. Here's the testing that gets done. And that imbues trust.
Hugely, because I didn't think people are getting wary now. There's enough media attention around what has happened on Amazon, what's been found, whatever. But they're getting wiser too, right? They're starting to demand testing in certain areas, but it's still not 100%. But it is a chance for the smaller retailers, like you said. They've already got a relationship built with their customers, again, because they're providing counsel and they're there for advice. And And they're carrying brands that a lot of the big chains don't carry, right? Because they are going to the ones that they're doing some homework on, and they like the story and the brand story. But again, you've got to, buyer beware. It really is. It can be a great facade. The story sounds great and they're saying all the right things. You just don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And I've had, we do, I know we're talking mostly supplements, but, we also do food and beverage. And I've had some clients tell me that, like olive oil, whatever, they really lean on, we've had this relationship with this, with the manufacturer for years and years. And, they went to each other's children's weddings and all this. That's lovely. That's a lovely story.
Yeah.
But you don't know what's happening down the line. You might be, CEO to CEO, they're all doing the weddings and whatever, but down, there's pressure to deliver results. There's pressure to deliver margins. There's pressure. You don't know what decisions are being made. But the CEO may not even be aware of, that it's just, or they're just smiling and saying everything's great. Because that's just, it's reality. Unfortunately, I wish everyone took the higher road and didn't do this, but then we wouldn't have any reason to exist.
Well, here's the other part of that we've seen several times, and people are going to think of brands as soon as I talk about this, but the different formulations. And sometimes, when brands go mass market, they will change their formulation and it says it on the label. But think about when businesses are acquired, there's a new mandate. They don't always stick to the values. When there's an acquisition, the acquisition has to pay off in the end. And maybe it's because the brand is amazing and they can build on that story that's been there and they stick to the values. I wish that's how it always happened. But many times it's like, great, you have become a trusted brand in the market. How can we cut costs? And what do we now eliminate? And sometimes that's on the label and sometimes it's not. And so I think, again, buyer beware when there are things that are starting to change structurally in a company, that this is an opportunity for people to say, hey, maybe we should have some testing on this product to make sure that it's still the same that we've always offered to people. And again, this is a story to tell your customers, because every time that you make an investment like this, you are proving to your customers again that you are the one that can be trusted. They don't have to stay loyal to a brand. You are the gatekeeper that is helping them not have to worry about this or think about it. So that should be communicated every time you've got something going on. And sometimes it's like, hey, great news. It's still the same formula.
Yeah. Happy to say no change. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And it is, one of the slides in my presentation was, some of the red flags to look for, and you've said a few, like if the company has recently been acquired or whatever, but, there are things, and they're common sense, if their spidey sense is going off for some reason, then that's probably a reason for you to do your own testing. And again, like I said, it's not an expensive thing to do at all, and it's peace of mind. Yeah. And if you ask the supplier to do some testing other than what they're already doing, and they refuse, that's a red flag.
Yeah,
that to me is again, what do you have to hide?
Well,
why won't you do it?
Maybe they're already doing it and you didn't know about it, and then they can just show you the results. So sometimes that's the case, but the more that retailers are asking, and I always think about this, I know that smaller retailers feel like I don't really have buyer power or influence power or whatever, but the more that the community starts to talk about these things, ask these questions, raise their hands, the more power that and influence that the retailers have, because they're binding together and talking about things that are important to everyone.
No, you're bang on. There is unfortunately a subset of the population on the manufacturing side or ingredient supplier side who are doing bad things, and they don't care. They're doing it for all the reasons that we've talked about already. But the minute there's a groundswell of demand for this information, then they will have to do the right things. But there are some who today, and we're very fortunate, we first of all, we're as an organization, we're not militant. We're not out looking for problems. We're not taking products off shelves and doing exposés or whatever. We want to work with people who want to do the right things. And so those are the proactive companies that are saying, we want to be able to be assured ourselves and assure our clients or the consumer, if it's the end product, that we have done everything and that we can, give you that confidence and trust in our product. Others will be brought there kicking and screaming, probably, unfortunately, but it'll take consumers demanding,
Yep.
What is this product really authentic? Is there anything else in here? Because one thing that I think scares consumers a lot now is that we're all really proud of ourselves for reading labels now. We didn't used to read labels. Like 10 years ago, you barely glanced at them. You looked at maybe calories and fat, like that was all that we really cared about.
Yep.
Now people are really scrutinizing and studying. And if it's an ingredient deck that's this long, oh my God, what's in it? And unpronounceable things.
Yeah.
So we think we're making informed choices. If you still want to buy the thing that's not good for you, well, you're doing it eyes wide open. But what if the label is wrong? You've lost control.
Yep.
This is what's scaring consumers, because up until now, they thought they were doing the right thing. I'm going to be an informed consumer and make a decision based on what I see here because I'm going to read it.
Yeah.
I'm going to be informed. And now, if there's something on there, something in the product that's not on that label, you don't know.
Yeah.
This is the scary thing we're in today. We've lost control. So there's going to be, I know, a movement for authenticity. And authenticity, the word is, be your authentic self. And it was the Merriam-Webster word of the year in 2023. But when it comes to supplements and food and beverage, authenticity is paramount. You can't play with that. You need to make sure that there's nothing else in that product. Because even if it's not meant to kill you, it's just in there to, dilute and, it's a filler. Anything that's not declared on the label could be a food safety hazard for someone. It might be an allergen for someone.
Yeah.
If it's not declared on the label, that could be a problem for you.
Yeah. And as more and more people become aware of that, and the consumers will hold the retailers accountable too. And then the retailers hold the manufacturers accountable, and then movement takes place where things happen. But I think the retailers can get ahead of this and put a stake in the ground and talk about it whenever they're doing this, because I think consumers would appreciate realizing that someone's looking out for their best interest. And the more that you talk about, we do this, bottom line, we do this, we don't put things on our shelves that don't have what's in the label or that have other things that are not on the label in the jar, then the more consumers trust that they come to you to figure out, okay, what brands do I trust? Which product does have the amount of the ingredient that I'm looking for in the actual jar? And so they come to your store, they trust you, they buy from you, or they trust what's on your shelves. And so I think the more that they do that, just the better outcome for them and their community. But take us back, because you said something that I thought was interesting, were red flags. And of course, we mentioned like there's a change of leadership or a company gets acquired. What are the other red flags that you see where you might be like, interesting?
You know what? It would be where there's a shortage of product. If you know that you're reading about, there's problems getting ingredients, like when the war broke out, unfortunately still going on with Russia and Ukraine, there was a shortage of sunflower oil. So when you hear those things and someone's coming to you with a really great price on sunflower oil, you're going to go, this is really, so, and I'll give you another example. I think during COVID, there was a rush on elderberry. Elderberry, is purported to be good for the immune system. There was more, apparently, this is a factoid here, but apparently more elderberry sold during COVID than there was raw material available in the world.
Yep.
So things that make you go, isn't usually a red flag, So, like I said, if someone is unwilling to test a product, really adamantly unwilling, saying, nope, I will not, maybe they're just being idiotic and they have nothing to hide, but that's just, if you don't have the proof, you don't have the proof. If there are just, there's supply chain woes in some area, shortages in something, you need to be maybe just a little bit more vigilant to make sure that product, because not everything is right for adulteration. It's an opportunistic crime, right? And so the fraudsters, the minute there's a shortage of something, that's where they leap in, and they will be able, you hear about, and again, I keep talking about olive oil, but you keep hearing about, truckloads of olive oil being stolen. And so that stuff is, being diluted and being resold and relabeled. And so you need to be aware. If you hear things like that, these are, you've got to ask your suppliers to provide the proof that they're going over and above. And like I say, it's usually your spidey sense. I can't remember what was on, there was like maybe 10, 12 things on my red flag list. And it wasn't an exhaustive list, There was somebody in the audience said, what about this one? Yeah, that's a good one, right? But when something seems off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, if your listeners are going, oh my God, I can't start testing everything in the store. It's really more, you said it yourself, you're choosing what to bring in. There's stories, you're listening to brand stories from some of these manufacturers and suppliers of products that you say, that aligns with my values, that aligns with what I believe my customers are looking for. I would bring your products in. You'll ask them, did you do all of your testing, show me your CFA, whatever. But you don't know at the end of the day, like if they've really gone through everything. The more important thing to be testing is anything that is exclusive to you.
Yeah.
Because you can't be testing everything in the store. It just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And the responsibility is the responsibility of the manufacturer and the brand owner. But you are the brand owner, even of a white label.
Yeah.
In the eyes of the consumer, that's your brand.
Absolutely.
Even if it's, a stock formula that, the manufacturer given to others and other stores with different brands, you're promoting it as your brand. Yeah. So you've got to stand behind it. And I would say that's priority number one. I don't want people to listen to this and go, oh my, overwhelming. I can't, be testing everything, asking everybody for proof of this, that, and the other. Some of it you've got to just go with your gut or just trust. But if it's your brand, that needs to be priority number one.
Yeah, there's a lot of trust in this industry that you build relationships and partner on trust. I love asking the manufacturers though, or the brands, like, what testing have you done? And then they can show you what they're up to. And many of them, especially in this industry that serve the independent retailers, are absolutely on top of it. They are testing the products. There are such great manufacturers and brands in this industry that are trustworthy and can provide you with what's going into their bottles. And then there are others that you might have question marks about. And I think specifically in terms of when your customer has is pulling you to make a decision to put something on your shelf that you haven't heard of, you haven't worked with that brand before, you ask your peers, because I think this network is just amazing to be able to check other things out. If you have a peer group here that you can talk to and be like, have you heard of this product? Have you heard of this brand? What's your experience? How's that going? So word of mouth and peers that you trust are huge for this. But more and more consumers are coming into your store with the TikTok, and they're like,
oh God, yeah,
I want this thing.
Yeah, TikToks are the new Dr. Oz. It's
Absolutely
the latest, greatest. Yeah, seriously. But again, when you were saying they come and they'll show you, the good ones will say, here's all the testing I've done, and it can look very impressive, because again, a lot of the regulatory requirement is the stuff of it's routine quality testing. Again, the heavy metal, the pesticide, the microbial, the pathogen, all of that, they'll show you. Boom, 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 boom. They should have identity tests on them. And this is where I'm saying, just ask, is that an identity test or an authenticity test?
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll see right away if they even know what you're talking about. They may not even know the difference. And so it just shows that you're you're aware, you're on top of things, and you know that an identity test is only telling you about the identity of the product, that's in there, the ingredient that you expect is in
Yeah.
there. You need to know, you need to be informed to be able to ask the right questions and not just, oh, that looked impressive. You just rambled off a list of things. Check, 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 check.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of white label, and I know you're saying if a retailer wants to start doing testing, that's the place that you would start, is with a white label because your name's on it. And I absolutely agree with that. And I will say we have just recently talked to an essential oils company. And this is one of your red flags that came up when we were having this discussion, that the amount of lavender essential oil we are selling outpaces the amount of actual lavender that if all of it
There you
were
go.
harvested can be in that product. And so the question sometimes for essential oils and others are, is this natural or is this synthetic? Just so that you can understand what is going in the bottles that you're putting your brand name on, and asking that simple question, is this man-made versus is this from nature
Synthetic.
that's being
Yeah.
right? So that's a really great question. And then also that can totally be tested.
Well, and I'll give you another example, collagen.
Yeah.
We have been testing collagen and we have been shocked. There are some brands out there with, very expensive. People are shelling out big money on supplements to begin with.
Yeah.
And not only are you spending a lot of money, you're expecting some sort of benefit, right? That's the other thing.
Yes.
And we have tested collagen. So most people want to know if it's really marine collagen versus is it, plant, which is another story. But we're testing collagen, and we have found in some of the very big, well-known brands, zero collagen.
Oh no.
It's all gelatin.
Yikes.
Yeah, yikes. Big yikes. So again, this is bandwagon. Collagen big. People are talking about it. It's TikTok and it's whatever, all over the place. And so suddenly you realize that, people are shelling out. And it's not the more expensive ones are the better ones, right? You can't even use that as a bellwether at all, right? As a gauge. So yeah, you need to buyer beware on everything. And as more and more consumers hear these things, like we were just saying, they're going to demand that there's some sort of proof, which is why we have our certification, And, here's a small pitch, but I'll tell you, the certification, we just came out very recently with an interactive trust mark. So, and we were challenged by one of our clients who said, how are you going to communicate what this means, certified authentic? It's not as obvious as, peanut free or gluten free, right? It's, just next to a peanut. You're like, oh, okay, well, I know what that means. What you think authentic means and what our interpretations could be different. So we've created, and, we're the first, but we're not going to be the last, I'm sure. It's a QR code based certification. So when the consumer is at the shelf, they can, and now, QR codes are back in because you just need your phone camera. You don't need an app, which is great. So it takes you immediately to a site that tells you what authenticity means and what this product had to do to become certified authentic. Nice. So it really is, because there's no room on the label to go, already we're peeling back to read other things like in, microscopic fonts or whatever. So this is an opportunity to be able to go and see right there where you're in the store and you're making a decision about whether or not to buy that product or that product, right? And that's why people like Brian at True Grace, like they've, embraced this because they want to be able to tell that story.
Yeah. And
not on their own, right? They don't have to sit there and do a lot of marketing about it. It's right there on the label.
Yeah. And when I'm thinking about the collagen story that you just told, because what happens is these things like come into vogue, right? And people start taking them. But the minute that we do have a little bit of pill fatigue, I think Brian Hall mentioned it on our podcast as well, but you're taking so many things because you're looking for the benefits. But after a month or two, if you're not seeing any difference, you're not going to continue to buy. So this is as much for you, the retailer, as it is for the consumer. People are not going to continue to buy a product that isn't working for them.
No, it's true. It's true. And so, I mean, there are, back to the red flags. I mean, there are red flags that should be pretty self-evident. You know, one of the things that I was talking about at Soho was unusually low prices too, right? Like, I mean, that's, if it's too good to be true, there's a reason it's too good to be true.
Yeah.
But the other thing we didn't talk about, which is really kind of critical, especially in the supplement world, is there are so many hands on the products today. There are so many intermediaries between distributors. You know, of course, there's the manufacturer, but there's distributors, there's importers, there's brokers, there's all sorts of people that potentially can touch this. So when there are multiple, you just wonder how well they know, you know, down the supply chain, what's happened. Because all of those opportunities are opportunities for somebody to do something, right? Potentially. And if there are new intermediaries being brought in, that's another time to do testing, right? Yeah. So now things have changed. Like you said, an acquisition could be, things have changed, or not an acquisition, but they've just changed who they're using now for manufacturing. There's obviously some, you know, again, some people use co-manufacturers or co-packers or whatever, right? So these are things that, again, you need to just be wary of and think about it. Or a sudden change in supplier, right? Like, I've had to change my ingredient supplier because I'm having trouble finding XYZ from this country or whatever. That's okay. That's great. I hope you're testing it. If you're not, I will.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so we've probably overwhelmed everyone a little bit.
I hope not.
Well, this does feel a little bit scary and a little bit more than like one independent retailer can tackle. So, but I love your advice that there is some trust that you can have in manufacturers and brands who are doing the right thing, who you can ask, and if they actually understand some of the questions that you're asking, at least they know about it and they're required to have that responsibility. The place to start probably is with anything that has your name on it. And I think that they can reach out to your company and say, okay, my budget is X. What can I do? What can I look at? What can I make sure of?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to start.
So how do they reach you?
Best thing to do is to go right to our website. We just relaunched the website a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago. So we're very proud of it. I think we've demystified it. I think it's a bit complex. I think when you land there now, it should be painfully obvious what we do and why we do. And I think that message, I think, gets through. So come to our website. It's www.purity- always that hyphen will get you.
Yeah.
IQ.com. Purity-IQ.com.
And we will put that in the show notes as well. Just
great.
So people have a place to go.
So there's, you know, even just the landing page should be sufficient to give you a good working knowledge of what it is we do and how we do it and how that can help you. And then there's a way to reach us through that. And I see, as the CEO, obviously the sales team and the technical team get these, but I see too the inbound communication that comes in. So I will be able to see that as well and make sure the team's all over it.
Yeah, and there are brands that are already using Purity IQ. So definitely look for the label of certification there. And then reach out to the Purity IQ team, especially if you have a white label product in your store. Even if you're smaller, there are small investments that you can make to really make a difference, and then talk about it constantly in your marketing. We do this on behalf of our consumers because we care that what we're providing is what you're actually putting in your body.
Super important.
Yep. All right. This was a delight. I always love talking to you. We could probably talk for hours because there's
I
so
have a plane to catch, so we
yeah,
can't.
so we
But
can't. We're going to honor that time today, but it
thank you.
is so great to talk to you. You're so knowledgeable. I love that you have that retail background. It gives you such compassion for the people who are actually running these stores, and would love for people to come by, get to know you, and get your services working on their behalf, whether they're a brand or a retailer who's offering white label products.
Thank you. Thank you. We're very, very passionate about what we do. The team is really pumped to be doing something to make a difference, hopefully. And I want to thank you for having me here and inviting me. This has been great. Love the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate that you're here. And if you've enjoyed what you heard, pass this on to a friend who needs to hear it as well. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for joining us for the latest episode of the Natural Products Marketer podcast, where we're here to help you grow your business so you can serve more people and change more lives. If you have any questions that have come up during this episode or others, or there's just a retail challenge that you're facing today, I would love for you to reach out to us at info@naturalproductsmarketer.com. We're here to answer questions. But most of all, if you have a question, then another retailer probably also has that question. So we can bring experts onto the podcast to give you the information that you really need. And if you liked what you heard, give us a thumbs up or give us a review on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening today. All right. It was great to see you.